We all know that our time here is limited, right? I mean, logically, we get it. But if you actually look at how we live our lives, it's almost like we're in this constant state of denial. So today, we're going to dig into a really simple but profound question. Why do we act like we're going to live forever when we know for a fact that we won't? Okay, so the source material for this whole discussion cuts right to the chase with this one single question. Do people know they have to die one day? And, the intellectual answer is, well, of course they do. But the source immediately challenges that, suggesting that the way we actually live tells a completely different story. And this really gets us to the heart of the issue, a universal paradox that pretty much defines the human experience. We're about to explore this huge gap between what we know in our heads and how we act in our day-to-day lives. So here's the central mystery. On one hand, you've got your rational mind that totally understands life is finite. But on the other hand, our behavior often just screams a complete denial of that reality. So what's up with that disconnect? Why is it there? To help us really wrap our heads around this, the source doesn't just stay philosophical. It gives us two incredibly powerful real-world examples. We're going to look at a scenario from the very end of life, and then another one from the peak of earthly power. All right, let's dive into that first example. The source takes us right to a hospital bedside to look at the strange behavior of someone who knows for sure that their time is almost up. The question the text throws at us is startlingly direct. Why does a dying patient still show attitude? It's a really profound observation, isn't it? You'd think that at the very end, all the ego and pretense would just fall away. But as the source points out, that's often not what happens at all. And this is where the paradox just becomes crystal clear. On one side, you have the unavoidable, undeniable reality. Death is right around the corner. And on the other, a behavior that seems to completely fly in the face of that. So what is that attitude really all about? You have to wonder, could it be one last grasp for control? A final, defiant act of the self, of the ego, when faced with ultimate powerlessness? Or maybe, just maybe, it's a kind of psychological shield, a defense mechanism to protect the mind from the overwhelming terror of what's coming. The source really makes you think. Okay, so now let's switch gears. We're going to pivot from the end of life to those who seem to have totally mastered it. The source shifts its focus to a different group who also seem to forget their own mortality: the wealthy. And the text poses an equally sharp question here. If wealthy people know they're going to die just like everybody else, why do they act in ways that cause so much suffering? Why do they oppress the poor? And look, this isn't just some vague accusation. The source gets very specific, pointing to two distinct acts of injustice. These actions suggest a pattern of behavior that completely ignores our shared human condition. The text spells it out. They oppress the poor, and they take what is rightfully theirs. Think about that. These are conscious choices to build a hierarchy in a world where, at the end of the day, death is the great equalizer. So here it is again, that same paradox, just from a totally different angle. The reality is a shared mortal fate that no amount of money can ever change. But the behavior? It's to build systems of power and injustice, almost as if they believe they're exempt from the rules that bind the rest of us. So how does something like this even happen? Well, based on the source, you can kind of trace a possible psychological path. It starts with accumulating all this wealth, which creates a sense of separation, a feeling of being different. This separation can then lead to a kind of forgetting, a forgetting of our shared mortality. And once that happens, well, it becomes a whole lot easier to justify oppressing others. It's a really dangerous illusion. Okay, so let's bring both of these powerful examples together now. We've got the dying patient on one side and the wealthy oppressor on the other. What's the common thread here? What's the one single reason that could possibly explain both of these behaviors? It really makes you wonder, are these two behaviors, one of this internal defiance and one of external dominance, are they actually just two different expressions of the exact same human struggle? Could they be two sides of the very same coin? And that brings us right back to the source's ultimate question. What is the reason behind this? What single driver could be powerful enough to make us act so irrationally, so illogically, in the face of life's only true certainty? And here's the potential answer that seems to bubble up from the text. Both the patient's attitude and the oppressor's cruelty could be seen as these elaborate, maybe even desperate attempts to deny death. By asserting power, either over your own sense of self or over other people, you create this powerful illusion of control. It's a misguided rebellion against the one thing none of us can ever control. In the end, the source doesn't really hand us a neat, tidy answer. And maybe that's the whole point. Instead, it leaves us with an even more powerful question. It shifts the focus from why do we forget we're going to die to what happens if we choose to remember? Because if we all truly lived with the knowledge that the end is coming for every single one of us, how would that change the way we treat each other, starting right now?